Hello and welcome to India's World. Europe is confronted with its greatest refugee crisis since the Second World War. Hundreds of thousands fleeing war zones and persecution in West Asia and North Africa are trying to seek asylum in Europe, often risking their lives. A couple of weeks ago, 700 migrants drowned crossing the Mediterranean from war-torn Libya. A few days back, Austrian authorities made the grisly discovery of 71 bodies of migrants in a truck. And more recently, the body of a 3-year-old Syrian boy washed up on a Turkish beach has led to an international outrage. The ongoing migrant tragedy in Europe has already cost upwards of 2,500 lives up to now. German Chancellor Angela Merkel has urged EU to take a moral position on the issue of refugees and warned, if Europe fails on the question of refugees, its close connection with the universal civil rights will be destroyed. She has criticized the resurgence of xenophobia and suggested working out an EU-wide solution to the problem. She has also announced Germany's decision to accept more Syrian refugees. On September 14th, interior ministers from 28 EU countries will hold an emergency meeting on the migrant crisis. However, the greatest hurdle to an EU agreement on joint action is the fact that migration pressure varies from country to country. In effect, because of the migrant crisis, the EU core principle of free movement, embodied in the passport-free Schengen area, seems to be in dispute. To discuss the origin and consequences of the refugee crisis facing Europe, we have with us a very distinguished panel of experts. We have with us Ambassador Kanwal Sibal, a formidable diplomat. He is a former Foreign Secretary of India. He was also India's ambassador to Turkey, Egypt, France, and Russia. Ambassador Aftab Seth, he was India's ambassador to Vietnam, Japan, and Greece. He's also served in Egypt. And we have with us my friend Ambassador Shiv Shankar Mukherjee. He was India's ambassador to Nepal and Egypt and High Commissioner to the UK and South Africa. I welcome you, gentlemen, to this discussion. Ambassador Sibal, let me begin with you. Now, up to now, it was said that the Second World War was the largest refugee crisis in modern history, when tens of millions of Europeans became refugees. The next peak came in the 1990s, when 3 million fled the conflict in former Yugoslavia. The present influx is expected to surpass even that. What has brought about this crisis?
Well, if one was to be a little polemical, one would say that Europe itself is responsible. In any case, Europe was responsible for the Second World War, and it destroyed Yugoslavia, and then it destroyed Iraq and Libya, and in the process of destroying Syria, Syria in fact has been destroyed. And what is happening is a direct result of this destabilization of whole countries and regime changes. So on the one hand, Europe is responsible itself for the crisis. On the other hand, Europe now is faced with a very big moral crisis, where if they don't accept these refugees, turn their back to them, then precisely what Angela Merkel has said, that Europe will be violating its own commitment to those persecuted and human rights and everything else. But unless there is a serious consciousness within Europe that they are responsible for this crisis and change their policies, this particular problem will continue to actually get accentuated. So while it's okay, they will take in these refugees in greater numbers and devise some mechanism within the European Union to do so, but they must also change their policies. Yeah. Now, I don't know if there is sufficient consciousness of the second.
Yeah, okay. Ambassador Seth, why was Europe then taken by surprise by this influx of refugees? Did they not think that the promotion of Arab revolutions and participation of Europe in regime change policies, originating often in the United States, but Europe actively participating in it, did they not think that the consequences will react back on them? They'll have to, face some after effects, from increased terrorism to influx of refugees?
Yes, I think, blaming Europe for it is only part of the picture. I think those who are supporting people like ISIS, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, and there are 2 Arab countries which we know are the main funders of this diabolical organization.
Why don't you name them?
Saudi Arabia and Qatar.
And Qatar.
Yeah. So, a lot of the refugees are actually escaping decapitation. The possibility of losing your head is what they are escaping. And they're escaping to Europe because Europe, while I agree, they have been responsible for a lot of the destabilization of Iraq and so on. Because Europe is seen as a peaceful refuge. also a prosperous one. So those who are escaping the dangers of decapitation, and they're not only ISIS, there's the police state in Eritrea, there are Somalis who are escaping from their country, there are Sudanese who are escaping problems in their own country. So they go to Europe because Europe has changed since the Second World War, in the sense that it has, as Angela Merkel said, they have this sense of moral responsibility to take in refugees. And I have served in Germany, and I know from that time onwards that they have been taking large numbers of Turks who were Gastarbeiters, but they were also taking Khalistanis, which was an embarrassment to us.
Master Mukherjee, would you agree that broadly there are two refugee trails to Europe? One originating in the unrest in West Asia and North Africa, especially Syria and Iraq, and the other one originating in the Balkans, from Kosovo, Serbia and Macedonia, people looking for better economic prospects, escaping high unemployment.
I would agree, but I would make it three. The two you mentioned, plus the immigration stream that has been there since decolonization in Asia and Africa, which has continued over the years, the Algerians in France.
Base level refugee.
These are people, escaping poverty with a dream of a stable and prosperous life in Europe. That has continued. That has continued. The numbers may have come down from the larger numbers in the immediate aftermath of decolonization. But yes, the refugees we are talking about today, the crisis in Europe today, the explosive problem that they are facing, the quantum jump in the crisis, is basically because of people, like Aftab said, escaping conflict.
Yeah.
Now, there's another dimension to it, because it's Europe that is in focus. It's that the Arab refugees escaping the horrors of being caught up in a conflict zone in Syria, Iraq, Libya, are all going to Europe. Which means to me two things. One, they look at Europe, as he said, as a haven of prosperity, of democratic regimes which have, whether you like it or not, whether you look at the rise of right-wing parties, which has laws protecting people who have been given asylum, who have humane laws regarding refugees and so on. The other aspect linked to this is none of them are going, very few of them are going to countries in the Gulf, which are their cultural brothers and cousins.
Zero refugees in Saudi Arabia,
they don't see a
zero
future
in
for them
Qatar.
and their children there.
Zero in Saudi Arabia, zero in Qatar.
Precisely.
So why should they go to people who have created the problem for them in the first place?
Well, one wonders because they are Arab nations. They speak the same language. They're the same kind of people. They're very rich. One would presume that some of the refugees would be attracted by that, but they are not. That's a commentary which your viewers can judge.
Complete inaction on the part of these countries.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. We need to take a break at this point. We'll be back again with this discussion in a bit. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're discussing Europe's refugee crisis. Ms. Sibal, why does Europe see its refugee problem as unmanageable? While it expects countries neighboring the conflict zones, such as Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan, even Libya, to house a much larger population of refugees. Only 10% of the refugees from this region are coming to Europe. Yet the world's attention is focused on Europe's problems and not problems of Turkey and Lebanon, because they also have to deal with these huge populations of refugees. Turkey has in fact set up a separate town for refugees, a separate city.
Well, Turkey is itself responsible in great measure for the crisis in Syria, especially.
Yeah.
So they are paying for their own misguided policies. And insofar as Europe is concerned, it's because it is news. And since the Western news media actually condition what appears in the international press and draw the attention of people all over the world to their problems, because they are the, if you like, the dominant powers of the world. So what happens to them is news. And in the case of Europe, you're right. In fact, so far only 270,000 refugees have entered Europe. And the total population of Europe is 550 million. So in that context, it doesn't seem very large. I mean, look at us. We say there are 20 million Bangladeshi refugees in our country. The numbers are much greater. But the problem there is that 2, 3. One, that it is creating tensions within their own societies. The right-wing groups are coming up, and they're becoming a political force. They're an anti-immigration sentiment. And then, much more importantly, actually now multiculturalism is begun to be challenged because they find that these communities don't integrate. They bring with them values which are not in conformity with European values. Then they go and get settled in ghettos, and that itself creates problems. So assimilation is a huge problem for them. And then the East Europeans don't want these refugees. They only go to certain select countries. So they wish me therefore Germany, France, and maybe Italy, Sweden. They are the ones who feel the greatest pressure. Now, therefore, the European Union is discussing quotas. And this and that.
Yeah, we're going to discuss that in a bit. Ambassador Seth, do you think there's a need to make a distinction between political refugees and economic migrants to Europe in terms of their right and privileges of asylum?
I think they're often the same person. I mean, a political asylee or a potential political asylee may also be someone who's very well qualified and who wants to better his chances in his life. One of the reasons why Saudi Arabia and Qatar are not accepting their brother Arabs is that a lot of the Arabs escaping are Christian from Syria and from Iraq, or the Yazidis, who are considered idolaters, and they won't be very welcome in Saudi Arabia or Qatar. That is the reason why Slovakia and Hungary call it intellectual derangement. A Hungarian leader has used that phrase to allow such people from these countries in. Now, they're not so worried about the Christians. They are willing to accept Christians, but it's the Islamic element that really worries most
of the migrants taking the Mediterranean route. If you look at their nationalities, according to a report, they're from people who are coming from Libya and Tunisia route to Italy. They have Gambians, Senegalese, and Somali. None of these countries have ongoing conflicts.
So they would be, of course, economic refugees, people wishing to better their circumstances in life. But the vast numbers really are coming in from Syria and Iraq.
See, Libya was a bulwark. Muammar Gaddafi was a bulwark against this kind of migration, uncontrolled migration. But with the breakdown of Libya as a state, now there is no state authority or mechanisms to check this onslaught of refugees towards Europe, on Europe. And now smugglers and others have got into the act, criminal gangs have got into the act. This is a direct fallout, what you mentioned about Gambia and all that. This is a direct fallout of the breakup of Libya.
Ambassador Mukherjee, so there's of course the issue of human trafficking, but under the Dublin Procedures of EU, the displaced person must be first registered and given asylum
in the country where
he enters Europe. But doesn't this put extra pressure on countries on the southern border of Europe, Italy and Greece? Because as it is, these countries are undergoing economic crisis of their own, and on top of that, they're supposed to follow Dublin procedures to give them asylum. So, Dublin procedure seems to have been waived in any case, and these people give them free passage to move on. So, is that what is happening? That there's undue pressure on the southern borders of Europe?
One of the problems that is happening, because geographically it is Italy and Greece that are facing the maximum problem, because that is where they all land. And Italy, of course, is right now the problem has been compounded with the conflict affecting the whole of the Middle East. But even traditionally, it's Italy, and from then onwards, I mean, they had fences, they had barbed wire for refugees from Libya and refugees from Central Africa, from Mali, from, Senegal, from all these places. And they are obviously protesting that the Dublin procedure has been agreed to by the European Union, all right, but we are now facing the brunt. Hungary is trying to, the train incident has been all over the news. Hungary has been saying that we are going to, Hungary is trying to get out of becoming not an entry point, but a staging point. So there are countries facing different kinds of problems, and that is why the Interior Ministers meeting on the 14th has got to sort this out, because even the quota system that's been suggested, that people, Europeans should share the burden, has been more or less rejected. So we have a very, the European Union, which is in the horns, to put it very simply, in the horns of a dilemma. On the one hand, Nobody likes immigrants because you have a political price to pay for it. The rise of right-wing parties, erosion of the vote. It takes a very brave politician to say that immigrants are really helpful to the economy. And on the other hand, the other aspect is the people at large also, deep down, are racist. I mean, most of the refugees are blacks and Muslims. And that, they fear, is social pollution.
Okay. In this context, how do you view German Chancellor Angela Merkel taking the unique initiative announcing that all Syrian refugees are welcome to Germany and taking the high moral ground? You know, at a time when you find that rest of the European leaders are being reduced to basest comments, including the Prime Minister of Hungary, who's actually made a communal comment. Angela Merkel taking this position, how do you view it?
First of all, Germany is the most sought-after destination of these refugees because it is the most powerful economy in Europe, and they feel they may have better employment prospects and this and that. That is one. The other is precisely what you said just now, that the Syrian refugees they'll accept. Because behind this is the political view they're taking about the Syrian crisis, that Assad is an ogre, Assad is violating human rights. So they are escaping from Assad's butcheries and everything else. So this is linked to how they are looking at the Syrian problem. And that's what I said earlier, that unless they take a more balanced view of their own responsibility for destabilizing Syria and creating this crisis, they will not be able to find an adequate solution. So I would look at Merkel's statement, the Syrian refugees are acceptable and they'll grant them asylum, whereas for others there'll be other procedures to be followed, as part of a political optic of what is happening in this part of the world, which is to my mind not the right one and needs better realignment of thinking.
Okay. All right, we need to take a break again at this point. We'll be back in a bit. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're discussing the migrant crisis in Europe. Ambassador Aftab said, how difficult would it be to draw up a common European asylum policy and finding the resources to sustain it in the context of the present crisis? I mean, they've had a common asylum policy in the past, but that was found unworkable.
Well, I believe the European Union has decided to give to whichever country accepts refugees 6,000 euros, I think, to help them settle in. And,
per refugee.
Per refugee, which is about, what, $6,800, to help the initial settling in. So that's a European view from Brussels. But obviously, each member state has to take a decision on how many it takes and how many it can absorb, how many it can assimilate. You remember post-1975, when there were large numbers of boat people, again, France, which was part of the EU as it was then, took in as many as 100,000 Vietnamese boat people. Now, that was partly because Vietnam was a French colony many years ago, but also both France and Germany, I think, have been the countries which have been most sought after by political refugees and those seeking a better life for themselves in economic terms.
Okay. Ambassador Mukherjee, do you think if Europe's economic crisis continues, the calls for stricter border control policies will rise, the popularity of anti-immigration platforms and right-wing political parties against immigration, they will start winning elections or start getting sizable amount of support? And will this threaten the fundamental structure of EU?
Well, that exactly is the dilemma I was referring to. The talk has already started. Already, this whole business of the Schengen regime being under threat, because once you enter any country in the Schengen area, you have free movement of goods, services, and people from one country to another. All that, I mean, it's already being talked about that there should be some kind of border controls to separate the genuine political refugees from the economic refugees. And how do you do that? At border controls, if you say we have to check to see who's an economic refugee, that means you have to check everybody. That means there's no Schengen regime anymore. So this is the dilemma. Certainly, there is bound to be a change. Whether it's a drastic change, I doubt, because Europe will want to maintain its image as a prosperous, humane continent and so on, and liberal and so on and so forth. And you know, their talk of human rights and all that sort of thing will take a horrible dent if they don't handle the immigration crisis properly and liberally. Definitely the extreme right-wing parties will foment hate because that has got them extra votes in the past. This is going to happen.
Okay. Ambassador Sibal, do you think that those European countries such as Germany, Sweden, and there are a couple of others, which have a rapidly aging population, are supportive of asylum as a means of inward immigration, inward migration, helping their workforce and their economy? And therefore, one must take that into account when some of these countries take a moral high ground on asylum seekers.
Because the studies are already showing that after 10 years, there will be a shortage of workforce in Europe. And they have to sustain their prosperity because the populations are aging. And they would like, therefore, to have skilled people coming in. Though, of course, the problem is that the people who are coming in are not necessarily the most skilled ones. And then there will be a big problem in terms of giving them the requisite training and everything else and making them useful members of society. So it's a big challenge that Europe is facing. So they have this dilemma that, in fact, if you have today 5% of the population of Germany who are of Turkish origin, why did they come in? They came in because the German economy after the collapse, after the Second World War, needed manpower. Similarly, in the case of France, they needed manpower and the Algerians came. So that element of the workforce requirements is very much there. But along with this now has come a whole host of cultural, social, and political problems that Europe, therefore, is facing a very serious dilemma. And at the end of the day, Europe, which always projects itself as the model of a future society with the right kind of values and liberal policies and peace and everything else, is now being subject to a lot of internal pressures, which they'll find very difficult to cope. And I think it'll be a wake-up call for Europe.
But Europe is a society that values human rights, is liberal. I mean,
yes, insofar as Europe is concerned, fine.
Yeah.
But when they go and destroy Libya, when they destroy Syria and cause such human tragedies on the ground, destabilizing whole societies, then how do you square this circle? That within their own territory, I agree. I agree that they follow very humane policies and are very liberal. But that doesn't get reflected in foreign policy.
Okay. Ambassador Seth, how do you see the future of Schengen area? How long do you think it will last? Will EU remain a borderless entity, or do you think sooner than later we'll see these border walls being built up? Fences are already coming up, but they're not coming up within EU as yet, thankfully.
Well, I don't think we're going to see a quick exit of my former bailiwick, which is Greece. I think they're still there in the EU. No, I think there is another dimension which is worrying the Europeans because of this massive influx and sudden influx, is that some terrorists might also use this, and especially the fact that the registration is not being done at the entry points in Greece as it should be according to the Dublin Procedures, that some terrorists might infiltrate. This Moroccan chap who was subdued in the Parisian train recently, being a case in point. He says he was only coming to rob, but he was armed to the teeth, and clearly he had other ideas on his mind. So I think the terrorist angle is going to be a very important part.
Absolutely.
We're running out of time. So last word to you, Ambassador Mukherjee. What does EU need to do to manage this crisis in a practical and humane manner?
Well, I think they'll have to compromise. The right-wingers who are wanting to get tough on immigration, set up border controls and so on, will have to, swallow the fact that there are larger things at stake, which is the whole European image in the world, their linked policies of, sometimes hypocritical, as Kanwal pointed out, that, it applies only so much to themselves and not
he would say always, but
not to. So I think there'll have to be a compromise, and compromises work, but they're always clumsy. So I'm pretty sure. I mean, they've been through 2 world wars. They are a prosperous part of the world which wants to maintain its prosperity. They will, I think, sort this out in terms of distributing the immigrants and so on. But they'll have to probably get tough without maybe formalizing it or letting too much attention on it. There'll probably be creeping border controls coming in.
Okay.
They are our biggest trade partner, by the way.
Yes, they are indeed.
As far as we are concerned, EU as an entity is our biggest trade partner, not China.
Absolutely. We've really run out of time. I would like to thank all of you, Ambassador Shiv Shankar Mukherjee, Ambassador Aftab Seth, Ambassador Kanwal Sibal, for coming here and participating in this discussion. That's all we have for you today. We'll be back again next week as usual. Till then, goodbye and thanks for watching India's World.